Story 1. Early childhood trauma is visible in teeth. Trauma, in this context, is anything that causes a stress response in the body, such as illness, parental separation, or abuse. Teeth grow at a predictable rate, similar to the rings of a tree. If you examine a tooth under a microscope, you will see rings of growth. Growth is disrupted during times of stress. The first stress ring we all have on our baby teeth comes from birth. Other stressors can create additional disrupted growth rings in baby teeth, and the same is true for adult teeth as they are still forming. My former professor was a pioneer in dental anthropology. For his work on these stress lines, he asked his zoo colleagues to send him the teeth of deceased primates or teeth that needed to be pulled, requesting no other information initially. Then, he and his graduate students would section the teeth, place them under a microscope, and print the images. They would mark visible signs of disrupted growth. Knowing that birth is the first disruption and understanding the rate at which teeth grow allowed them to provide day counts for each growth disruption after birth. Once they collected their data, my professor asked their zoo colleagues for the daily health logs for the primates. What they found was that each growth disruption corresponded exactly to stress events in the primate's life. Some instances were caused by illness or similar factors. However, the most interesting event he shared was the stress line on the tooth that corresponded with the primate being removed from its mother as a baby for necessary health checks at the zoo. This caused such a stress response in the baby that it became visible in the tooth growth. Story 2. When you go to Las Vegas and a casino advertises a 99.9% payout, it legally means that at least one machine on the casino floor has that payout among the other hundreds of machines in the casino, and probably only one. Story 3. About 20 years ago, I worked for a printing company that had a contract with the Funeral Home Federation. We printed various materials for them, including a sheet sent to funeral homes detailing wholesale casket pricing and the profit margins on each sale. At that time, a casket's wholesale cost was 10% of the retail price charged to consumers. For example, a $5,000 casket only cost the funeral homes $500. I can only imagine the markup now. Story 4. There is a wealth of historical information that is not available online. Digitizing materials requires significant manpower that many libraries and archives simply do not have. Story 5. No matter how well run the event you are attending, whether it be a theater performance or a concert, everything backstage is usually about 5 minutes away from turning into chaos. Story 6. Errors in tax returns are quite common in the federal government. That is why there is a specific section of the Internal Revenue Service that corrects your inputs. Story 7. I work for a company that distributes ice machines for a major ice machine manufacturer. Please do yourself a favor and avoid ice. People do not clean these machines. Story 8. When you call a company and speak to someone in their call center, it is likely that, regardless of your feelings towards the company, the person you are speaking with has even stronger negative feelings. If you treat them respectfully, they will likely look for any loophole or concession they can offer you. Story 9. A shockingly low number of children are actually at grade level, yet they are often promoted regardless of their literacy skills. When I taught English at a Title I school, I had around 38% pass, and that was considered good. When state tests were canceled in 2020, everyone on my social media was exclaiming, "They're just going to pass everybody to the next grade." But what if someone would have failed the test, and now they get to go to the next grade anyway? Unfortunately, over 60% of children already fall into this category. The general public believes that if they fail all their classes and state tests, they must stay behind because they are not proficient. Sadly, that is not the case. Story 10. If someone has diarrhea or vomits in a pool, it does not need to be drained. In fact, draining the pool might be less effective if proper disinfection procedures are not followed afterward. Instead, the chlorine level should be raised to at least 20 parts per million for at least 13 hours after all physical remnants have been removed. This process will eliminate any possible cryptosporidium bacteria in the pool. What does 20 parts per million of chlorine feel like? Simply putting your hand in the water to collect a sample will cause your skin to dry out. Note: the pool needs to be closed for 13 hours, not 23. Story 11. Expensive cars remain costly. The tires are costly. The parts are costly. The people who work on them are costly. Buying a Porsche or a BMW is not a one-time splurge. This might seem obvious to you, but I worked in a garage and I assure you I saw someone coming to that unpleasant realization every day. Story 12. Many bridges are in poor condition. I work in highway maintenance, and several of them are overdue for replacement. One bridge, in particular, has its deck held in place primarily by gravity, moving up and down independently of the supporting structure, which is misaligned due to lateral forces from eroding riverbanks. Fortunately, this bridge is finally under contract to be replaced this year. Story 13. I am a writer for corporate websites. We intentionally write at a 5th grade reading level to ensure accessibility for all readers, including those with visual impairments who rely on screen readers. Story 14. 56% of American adults do not have enough savings to handle a $1,000 emergency expense. 35% indicated they would have to borrow money to pay for it. Story 15. We strive to design construction zones that allow you to pass through as easily as possible. Significant thought and effort go into creating those traffic restrictions. Sometimes there simply aren't any ideal solutions. We cannot address the issues if you are driving on the affected road. Additionally, there are times when we do disrupt a seemingly functional road. What you might not realize is that the repair we implemented 3 years ago was merely a temporary solution to keep the road usable for a while until we could finalize the design for a proper repair. That 1.5 inches of milling and resurfacing is holding the deteriorating base together just long enough to secure funding for the necessary construction. Story 16. I am an electrician, and I would say that nearly everything I work with could shock an average person. Story 17. I work in medical billing and coding in the United States. 9 times out of 10, when your insurance denies coverage for a procedure or service, it is usually due to an error in how it was billed or coded by the provider's office. You should research this with the billers and your insurance before making any payment. Story 18. The top 10% of drinkers consume more than half of all the alcohol sold. The top 1% consume an amount of alcohol that is, frankly, astonishing. Story 19. Sociologist here. Facts do not make people change their minds, and lasting social change only occurs when older generations pass away. I dislike both of these realities. Story 20. I work at the corporate level. True executive compensation is astonishing. I'm not talking about base salary, bonuses, and stocks. Those are public knowledge and we hear about them every day. I'm referring to the extra perks that often go unmentioned. These include mortgages subsidized by the organization, company cars that are luxury vehicles worth 6 figures, car and home insurance covered by the company-paid private schools and tutors for children, wardrobe, beauty and fitness stipends, club memberships, and access to the corporate jet for personal travel. Imagine what simply not having to pay your full mortgage or car loan would do for you financially, not to mention all the other benefits. Story 21. I work in upper management at a large company, and I am shocked by how often people think that decisions are based on calculated moves with the data we analyze to conclude that option X is the most profitable. Even though we have analysts providing data, most major decisions are made by a C-suite executive or during meetings, where nobody reviews the data in depth or may only glance at the summary, and then dismissively say, let's proceed this way, even if it contradicts the data. It often feels like a group of individuals are relying on their instincts rather than seeking data to support their choices. Even in cases where decisions appear to be calculated, it is usually because we have faced a problem for years and someone suggests an alternative approach, resulting in improved numbers and resolving the issue. There seems to be little logic guiding the operations of many companies. Story 22. People in retirement homes have a significant amount of sexual activity, including both couples and widows. There is a notably high rate of sexually transmitted diseases among retirement home residents, making these facilities some of the highest in terms of infection rates for such diseases. Consider the impact of medication like Viagra combined with the leisure time available to older adults. Story 23. Those small pillows on the bed in a hotel room cost millions of dollars to design. I had a designer change their mind after we had already ordered and produced pillows for 300 rooms, so we had to discard them all and start over. Additionally, because the design is proprietary to the designer and the hotel chain, they cannot be donated or sold. They just end up in a landfill. Story 24. I worked in the medical device industry for 24 years, and I think the average patient would be shocked at how often surgeons ask sales representatives questions about what to do next with their equipment during a procedure while they are under anesthesia. It is important to note that sales representatives do not attend medical school. Story 25. Forensic psychologists note that many horrendous crimes occur but never reach the mainstream media. Certain trends influence which crimes receive coverage. For example, domestic violence is currently a prevalent topic in the news. It is not necessarily happening more frequently. Rather, the reporting is influenced by which stories attract attention. Story 26. Due to excessive measures by the government to minimize fraud and liability lawsuits, approximately 75% of the work in the social services field involves documentation. Workers could be spending more time in the field or assisting those in need, but instead, they are continually taking courses on unrelated subjects, completing multiple documents to achieve a single task, and making numerous revisions to ensure repayment from the funding source. Story 27. The number of women and men who have been severely sexually and physically abused in childhood is extraordinarily high and far beyond what most people can comprehend. I dislike my job at times. Story 28. Children who are brought to the emergency room for behavioral dysregulation often have to wait between 1 to 4 weeks to secure a bed in the pediatric psychiatric unit. This includes children who are actively hallucinating or attempting to harm themselves or others. This means they are confined in an emergency room with disturbing sounds, alerts going off at all hours, and constant chaos. They cannot sleep, have limited contact with their caregivers, and experience a lack of continuity of care, resulting in being examined by different healthcare providers daily. If they were not traumatized or experiencing psychosis before their emergency room stay, they certainly are afterward. I have witnessed this repeatedly. The medical system in the United States has significant shortcomings. Story 29. Unless you know an accountant who specializes in personal taxes, your friend who is an accountant likely doesn't know anything more about your taxes than you do. Story 30. You would not eat at half the restaurants you visit if you saw the kitchen. If you worked in the industry, you would recognize the flaws that someone who hasn't worked in the industry would miss or consider normal. The last 20 to 25% are barely acceptable. Story 31. You need long-term care insurance. When you are frail and in decline, you require constant care. You cannot simply hire someone to help grandma get out of bed and back in. If you cannot afford in-home care or a nursing facility, you will need to liquidate grandma's assets to pay for her care. It is not acceptable to let grandma stay home alone while considering her financial resources for when she passes away. Story 32. Physician. There are too many to list. A few that come to mind. There is a large number of people living with a brain aneurysm or some other form of blood vessel anomaly in the brain, such as arteriovenous malformation, that is completely asymptomatic and may go unnoticed. This condition could rupture one day with catastrophic consequences. Many hospitals have a mouse infestation problem. Many doctors enjoy partying and are known to use a significant amount of drugs when off-duty. The overuse of antibiotics is likely to induce the emergence of superbugs, which could lead to an epidemic that will make COVID-19 seem like a walk in the park. Story 33. I work at a labor union, and I think the average person would be shocked by the amount of abuse happening in the job market. Employers strategically bully their employees and navigate complex legal requirements to dismiss them in ways that minimize their benefits. Companies spend substantial amounts on legal fees to avoid paying wages that are much lower than their expenses. Thousands of people every month, many of whom never believed they would need a union or that their workplace would mistreat them, face these issues. This situation occurs here in Denmark, where strong labor unions and solid workplace protections exist. I dread to think how this would look in many other countries. I knew it was bad before I started, but after about 10 years, I have come to accept that no one should really trust their employer not to mistreat them, sometimes for trivial reasons. Story 34. Virtually all soft-serve ice cream machines use plastic scraper blades that wear down as they operate, shedding plastic into your food. Story 35. Your mental health diagnosis may be a hypothesis that changes throughout your treatment. Story 36. Vintage Fiesta ware can be radioactive and contain lead, depending on the year. Avoid chipped pieces. Story 37. The technology likely knows you are misleading and will simply go along with it. The average user has no idea that help desk representatives are usually reviewing logs and health data on your computer the moment you get on the phone with them. Story 38. There are far more suicides than you think, mostly among men, about 70%. It is never usually publicized due to the fear of copycats. Story 39. Airplanes often fly with broken equipment. While we won't fly if something critical is malfunctioning, it's possible to have a significant portion of our systems inoperative and still safely carry passengers. There is a guideline known as a minimum equipment list, and if you discover something broken, such as hydraulic system 1 pump, you can consult the list to determine the conditions under which it is permissible to operate with an inoperative hydraulic system 1 pump. A common issue on these lists is the auxiliary power unit, which is a small turbine engine located in the equipment bay that provides electricity and air pressure when the engines are not running. If you have ever been near a jet whose engines were off but still heard noise, it was likely this unit. As a result, many commercial jets operate with a broken auxiliary power unit. Although this practice is safe, it can be a challenge for both the flight and ground crews, as they often need to jumpstart the engines. Story 40. Most suicides are not dramatic, newsworthy events. I am not saying they are not meaningful, but they occur quietly. My husband took his own life in our home. No news crew is going to cover that, nor did we want them to. Story 41. Half of the world's population has a nutritional deficiency. 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. 735 million people go to bed hungry every day. Food and agriculture are responsible for a third of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the vast majority of deforestation, land use change, biodiversity loss, and freshwater withdrawal. Story 42. It costs about 95% less to make dental crowns and bridges. Therefore, an $800 full zirconia or Emax unit may be about $40. Story 43. Work in information technology and cybersecurity. The fragility of the internet you use every day would shock most people if they understood how much insecure, unstable, outdated technology gets deployed every day and goes without maintenance. Additionally, nearly all financial activities rely on Excel spreadsheets. Story 44. I work in housing for Los Angeles. Millions of dollars are wasted every year because people don't know how to fill out a housing application to secure free housing. Some individuals may forget to submit their applications. People are concerned about the homelessness crisis in major cities, but if they knew how much funding is available, mostly from taxes and private donors, they would be shocked. The housing provided is not just a bedroom in a halfway house. It is a genuine, nice one-bedroom apartment. Story 45. I work in a challenging yet essential field of child sexual abuse. It is well known that most child sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone the child knows, such as grandparents, parents, or cousins. This is a significant reason why I am firmly against homeschooling. While some children can benefit from a home curriculum, it creates a loophole for those who are abused, trapping them in unsafe environments. Without mandated reporters, these children have no one to turn to for help. Even more crucial is sex education. I am frustrated with conservative media claiming that liberals want to teach children how to have sex. This is not the case. Children need to learn at least the basic principles of consent and understand that they cannot consent due to their age. I have heard too many stories of young children realizing that their home lives were abnormal only after receiving sex education in school. If no one is there to tell children that sexual abuse is wrong, how will they learn? From television? From their peers? Story 46. Electrical arcs from high-energy direct current sources, such as electric car batteries or photovoltaic panels, are extremely difficult to extinguish once they are initiated. They continue until the energy source is depleted. While batteries do eventually discharge, photovoltaic panels will continue to operate until they either fail or night falls. The temperatures reached can be sufficient to vaporize or detonate anything that comes into contact with them. Protective measures are in place to prevent such occurrences. However, People often have an annoying habit of believing they are smarter than these safeguards. Story 47 depends on the average person's understanding of the world, but private equity influences everything around you, and the growth is extremely aggressive. If you have a successful local business, no matter what part of the country you're in, there is a massive chance that it has been invested in by firms like BlackRock or Ares Management. The organic brands at the grocery store, with their stories on the label about being family-owned and operated for 60 years, were funded by Varagon Capital. Tutoring centers, plumbing groups, and autism outreach organizations are supported by the same money that is financing European soccer transfers and affecting the U.S. housing market. The independent small business is struggling, being absorbed and combined into larger brands. Story 48. When you go to a restaurant with multiple empty tables and are told there is a wait, it is because the kitchen is backed up. Many people suggest waiting at the table, but previous customers who were given that opportunity and complained about their wait time are the reason no restaurant will seat you in this situation, regardless of how nice or patient you claim to be. Story 49. I am a mental health nurse and cannot stress enough that people with schizophrenia are neither inherently dangerous due to their diagnosis, nor do they have split personalities. Story 50. I was a research and development chemist in the food packaging industry for many years. We made a coating for those small cat food tins like Fancy Feast. Many people do not know that the expensive ocean white fish tuna pate flavor only contains a tiny sliver of white fish tuna. They produce it by taking small frozen blocks of all the leftovers from the fish processing industry, which includes different types of fish. They place one small sliver of ocean white fish on top of the block and send it into a grinder. From there, it goes into the cans. It's a total rip-off. Not to mention the smell in that processing plant was awful. Story 51. If anything else was designed and executed as poorly as software projects, literally half the country would either be dead or in federal prison for gross negligence. Story 52. I work in biodiversity and environmental conservation, and the current environmental and climate situation would shock many people, even those who are well informed about its severity. Story 53. Classically trained chef, fifth-generation fishmonger. Currently a restaurant consultant and designer. Fine dining only exists due to the exploitation of labor. Yes, there is a core of talented chefs who are paid decently at your favorite restaurants, but the bulk of the work is done by interns who are rarely compensated and often exploited. They are abused both physically and mentally until they break or quit. 95% of fine dining kitchens are guilty of this. Let's not even get into the predatory chefs who use their status and position to take advantage of young workers. Story 54. It is shockingly easy to be held against your will for even a suspected mental health crisis, and the entire system is broken and needs to be overhauled. Story 55. Not informing your children about going to sleep for surgery because it is better if they don't know is extremely traumatic for them. The look of fear, confusion, and betrayal on their faces is unforgettable. They cope much better when things are explained to them in an age-appropriate manner. Your attempt to protect them only makes it worse. Story 56. The average person has slightly more concern for their oral hygiene and health than expected, but a little less than hoped. The catastrophic cases make one ponder how a human being can subject themselves to living in such conditions. Story 57. I used to work at a residential mental health center for teenagers. The number of unwell and mentally unstable therapists and managers making treatment plans and important decisions for the residents is horrific. Story 58. If your trailer lights aren't working, chances are your truck has a blown fuse. Many people come in and say, "No, it isn't my truck. It's brand new. I just got it." Then I find all 3 fuses blown, and the customer insists there's still something wrong with the trailer. There might be, but the fuses are only 10 amps. They blow from time to time even if the trailer wiring is perfect. It has happened with brand new trailers. You hook it up the first time and they blow. It happens. So check your fuses before taking your trailer in for repair. You'll end up paying more to diagnose nothing when it's just a few 10-cent fuses. Story 59. I work as a tailor on e-commerce photo shoots. The clothes you see on the model have been altered to fit them specifically. Some companies invest in tailors to alter the clothes before the shoot. while others focus on post-production to edit the clothes afterward. I try to remind people that the images of clothes you see online are similar to a picture of a Big Mac. Many people work to make that product look as good as possible, so keep your expectations low. Story 60. Strawberries are not berries. They are considered an aggregate fruit because their seeds are on the outside and because the fruit consists of multiple smaller fruits. In the literal sense, the berry on a strawberry plant is an engorged, enlarged flower stem, also called a receptacle. Raspberries and blackberries are also not true berries, but are aggregate fruits because each seed is surrounded by a single droplet, and an aggregate of these droplets forms a blackberry or raspberry. Pumpkins, bananas, and peppers are all true berries because they are self-contained fruits enclosing multiple seeds. Story 61. Cruise ships are problematic from both an environmental perspective and issues related to cleanliness and hiring practices. Many cruise lines register in countries with lax labor laws, evade regulations, and often maintain unsanitary conditions behind the scenes. Even high-end cruise lines, such as Silver Sea, have been found concealing dirty dishes and other debris in crew quarters during health inspections. Additionally, incidents of sexual assault occur frequently but are often ignored. Cruise lines show little concern for being caught engaging in harmful practices, such as dumping waste into the ocean, as fines are negligible for them. I work at a travel agency that specializes in cruises. Story 62. I work for a charity that supports victims of violent crime, particularly domestic abuse survivors. If you are a man coming to us, you will probably be treated poorly. Attitudes are getting better, but the belief that men are the abusers and cannot be abused is still widespread. For some reason, there are people in the comments saying that men cannot be abused, so here are the facts. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. This includes a range of behaviors such as slapping, shoving, and pushing. 14% of women have experienced coercive control, and 16% of men have experienced coercive control. These are UK-based statistics, but they illustrate that men can also be abused. Let's stop arguing. Yes, women experience more physical violence, but men also experience it. Yes, more men experience coercive control, but women still experience it. If you are being abused, no matter your gender, please step forward. It's incredibly hard, but charities like mine exist for a reason. Story 63. The percentage of cardiopulmonary resuscitation being effective is between 10% and 17% in a hospital setting. However, when patients do survive, their quality of life is significantly poor. Story 64. As a trial lawyer, I can say that justice is a myth because politics controls the courtroom, not the facts or the law. Judges have too much discretion in civil matters, so the chances of getting a case heard through trial and appeal are very low. Lawyers are prohibited from publicly criticizing a judge and can face sanctions, discipline, or disbarment if they step out of line. Judges, meanwhile, have absolute immunity. Story 65. I think the sheer amount of information Google knows about you and how unashamed they are in trying to obtain people's data from businesses that utilize their advertising services would shock people. I work in digital marketing, and Google is a nightmare. Their most recent initiative is customer match lists. This essentially tries to convince businesses to provide their customer data as a way to acquire even more information. They present it as, if you do this, we can use it to target your ads to people similar to your existing customers who may be more likely to make a purchase. While it might work to some extent, it is incredibly obvious they are doing it primarily to gather more data. Google representatives frequently call our office attempting to convince us to share this information, and you'll receive recommendations every few weeks pressuring you into providing this data to continue using their services. We refuse every time, but I bet many companies give in. It's honestly so unethical, but the issue is that Google is the most widely used search engine, so utilizing Google Ads is essential for most businesses. They have an extensive amount of data on countless individuals. Story 66. The average 40-hour workweek office worker can likely complete their job in 20 to 30 hours. If someone is willing to do that, they often receive more work. Story 67. Parenting styles significantly affect the overall personality and respectfulness of children. Some kids do not experience love at home, while others interact with peers who come from a structured, nurturing environment. Creates a blend of experiences. I care for a child who is constantly engaged with their tablet at home, and it reflects in their mannerisms. Cause and effect. Everything is connected. Story 68. You would think that the IT infrastructure of large companies is a bulletproof and well-oiled machine, but 95% of it is held together with duct tape and relies on a 30-year-old computer in a basement somewhere. Story 69. You don't have to be buried completely to die in a trench collapse, only up to the waist. The weight of the rock and dirt will slow your circulation, and you will die within the hour. Story 70. No matter how much money you invest in your wedding or how creative you think you are being, the wedding last week and the wedding next week will be essentially the same. Story 71. If you experience a high-pressure hydraulic oil injection under your skin, you may not immediately realize it. The treatment involves cutting the skin back to the extent of the injury, physically washing out the oil, and attempting to stitch everything back together. Story 72. As an X-ray technician, it is concerning how often doctors prescribe certain exams. CT abdomen and pelvis exams can involve the equivalent of 3 years of background radiation. They are among the most frequently performed tests. While they are necessary for many patients, the number performed is excessive. Story 73. The United States and much of the Western world do not have a food supply problem. It has a greed problem. The United States has the world's highest per capita food waste. Oversupply usually leads to lower prices, but food producers create a false sense of scarcity to keep prices elevated. Your food costs are a direct result of price manipulation and collusion. Story 74. Brokerages have supercomputers located near electronic stock exchanges. The purpose is to monitor incoming trades and utilize that information to gain an advantage by a few milliseconds. Imagine playing poker and being able to see your opponent's cards. The net effect is that billions of dollars are effectively taken from retail and middle-class traders and transferred to institutional accounts. This practice remains legal. Story 75. Like someone else said about concerts and events, no matter how nice your meal is in the dining room, the kitchen is run by a group of sweaty pirates. Story 76. The amount of plastic waste that comes from life sciences research and teaching laboratories is astounding. Story 77. Movie theaters earn most of their revenue from concessions. They receive a very small percentage from actual ticket sales. While prices remain extremely high, some of it is justifiable. Story 78. The vast majority of sexual abuse and childhood sexual assault is perpetrated by a family member, including other children. I have worked with families who believed they did everything right by not allowing their child to go to sleepovers, teaching them about stranger danger, and not permitting them to use social media, only to be betrayed by a family member they thought they could trust. It is devastating, and I wish there were more widespread education. Story 79. I work in information technology across both the public and private sectors, with over 20 years of experience. If you believe that privacy of any kind still exists, you are mistaken. Story 80. Blind people use white canes for echolocation, not just for tactile feedback. There are many different kinds of canes and cane tips depending on the terrain. Blind people also participate in various sports, with goalball being the most obvious as it is exclusively for the blind. It is my favorite sport. The school where I work also offers blind soccer, where the ball has bells in it. There are also activities like beep baseball, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is easier to make sports accessible than people think, and I know some star athletes who are completely blind. Only about 10% of blind people are completely blind. Story 81. If your child is in special education, you should definitely volunteer at their school to monitor the staff they work with. I have been to many schools, and special education is often staffed by the least experienced educators. Story 82. Many people are surprised to learn that the human brain produces enough electricity to power a small light bulb. This fact highlights the incredible complexity and energy efficiency of the human brain, which constantly generates electrical impulses to facilitate thoughts, emotions, and bodily functions. It is a fascinating insight into the amazing capabilities of our bodies. Story 83. Almost nobody expects to be admitted to a nursing home because they never feel like they are old. The same goes for dying. You can tell someone that they are dying and will soon be deceased. Then ask, "What do you think you will do when you leave here today?" And they will rattle off some possible plans. You are not going home. This is the last stop. Story 84. I am a social worker and previously worked in an intensive care unit, primarily providing hospice-related care. Dying at home is not always easier or better for the patient. Home hospice, at least in New York, typically only covers a registered nurse to visit perhaps once a week, occasionally someone to deliver oxygen and supplies, and a social worker who comes in frequently. If you are fortunate, you may receive a few hours of assistance from a home health aide each week. The remainder of the care is provided by family members or privately hired home health aides. Furthermore, home hospice usually lasts from several days to about 6 months, which means you could be out of work and providing care for an extended period. Lastly, medical professionals often struggle to accurately estimate prognosis for terminal illnesses. They can offer a general idea of timeframes such as days to weeks or weeks to months, but they do not possess a precise countdown. Story 85. A woman is killed by her domestic partner every 6 days in Canada. Half of the women killed in domestic cases were murdered within 2 months of leaving their partner. Story 86. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation has dismal survival rates. 10% when initiated outside of a hospital and 17% in a hospital setting. When performed correctly, it usually breaks ribs, and the longer a person is without oxygen to the brain, the more likely they are to experience brain damage and related neurological complications. This does not mean it should not be performed. However, it is very unlikely that someone will quickly recover from cardiopulmonary resuscitation as depicted in television shows. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.